In the late summer of 1877, along a low and weather-beaten stretch of coast, the sea was watched, not for mystery, but for duty. At dawn, and again at dusk, men climbed the worn steps of lookout platforms and lighthouse galleries, their eyes trained on familiar horizons. They watched for wrecks, for unlit vessels, for signals of distress. The work was repetitive, quiet, and, by design, uneventful. The sea, after all, was dangerous enough, without imagination. This section of coastline, recorded in regional shipping notices as a reliable but unforgiving reach of water, had long been staffed by coast watchers, men employed or volunteered to observe the movement of ships and weather. Some were former sailors, others were fishermen grown too old for the open water. A few kept journals, not for publication, but to mark tides, winds, and the slow passage of days. Their world in 1877 was orderly. The rules were clear. The horizon was known. Behind them lay small stone cottages and a narrow road rutted by carts. Ahead of them stretched the open sea, gray more often than blue, broken by sandbanks and sudden squalls. The lighthouse lamp was trimmed nightly. The signal flags were kept folded and dry. Nothing about the routine invited speculation. And yet, beginning quietly, there were remarks. They appear first in logbooks, written without emphasis. Not warnings, not alarms, merely notes. Sea behaving strangely, this evening long swells, without wind. Surface disturbance observed well offshore, not attributable to traffic. Such entries were not uncommon. The sea, after all, was rarely predictable. But these remarks were followed by others, written by different hands, days apart, using similar language. On August 14th, one coast watcher, identified in later correspondence only by his initials, recorded seeing a vertical movement in the water beyond the shoals. He did not describe a wave. He did not describe a vessel. He simply wrote that the water rose unevenly, as if displaced from below. No alarm was raised. There were no cries from the lookout. No bells rung. The men assumed a submerged current, or perhaps debris shifting after a distant storm. The weather that day was calm. The wind light. Visibility good. Still, the sea did not settle. Over the following week, fishermen returning at dusk spoke of odd reflections on the water patches, where the surface appeared darker, heavier, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. One man described it as a shadow that did not belong to cloud or land. Such language was dismissed. Fishermen were known for metaphor. The coast watchers returned to their posts and their instruments. Yet something subtle had changed. Seabirds avoided a certain stretch of water. Not dramatically, no mass flight, no panic, but a noticeable absence. Nets cast nearby came back lighter than expected. The tide charts, carefully kept, no longer matched the behavior of the surf along one narrow section of coast. On August 21st, the lighthouse keeper noted that the lamp beam, normally clean across the water, appeared briefly distorted as though passing through mist despite the air being clear. He adjusted the lens. He checked the glass. He wrote nothing further. What none of them said aloud, but what can be read between the lines of their records, is that the sea had begun to feel observed. Not watched, exactly, but attended to. At night, when the wind dropped and the water lay flat, there were moments when the surface seemed to tighten, drawing inward. One watcher later recalled that the horizon felt closer than it ought to be, though at the time he laughed at the thought and blamed fatigue. There were no stories yet, no rumors in the papers, no visitors came to inquire. Life continued much as before, but the men lingered longer at the railings. They checked the same patch of water twice, and in their journals, the entries grew shorter, less descriptive, more cautious. By the final days of August, something was being noticed but not named, and it was rising, slowly, into awareness. Not as a spectacle, not as a threat, but as a quiet disturbance, waiting to be understood. The first incident that forced the coast watchers to speak to one another occurred without sound. On the morning of August 28, 1877, visibility was excellent. The sea lay nearly flat, disturbed only by a long, slow swell arriving from the open water. There had been no storms recorded in the previous days. The barometer was steady. Wind direction unchanged since dawn. Shortly after sunrise, Two watchers stationed at separate points along the coast observed the same phenomenon within minutes of each other. At approximately half a mile offshore, beyond the shoals but well within the field of view, the surface of the sea lifted. Not as a wave, not as spray. The water rose in a rounded vertical motion, subtle at first, as though pushed from beneath by something large but restrained. The men later described it as a bulging of the surface, smooth-edged and deliberate, lacking the chaos of breaking surf. It remained visible for several seconds. Then it sank. No sound followed, no foam, no debris surfaced. The water returned to its previous calm, as though nothing had occurred. The men waited. They checked their bearings. One retrieved a spyglass, expecting perhaps a vessel hull just beneath the surface, or a shoal shifting with the tide. Nothing was there. No mast, no wake, no disturbance spreading outward. By mid-morning, the watchers convened briefly at the base of the lighthouse. Their conversation, reconstructed later from letters and notes, was careful and restrained. No one suggested anything unusual beyond natural causes. A submerged rock, perhaps newly exposed by tidal shift, a distant underwater landslide, a large marine animal surfacing briefly, though no fin or body had been seen. They returned to their posts. But the sea did not behave normally afterward. Throughout the afternoon, the same area of water appeared thicker, its color slightly darker than the surrounding surface. Light reflected differently there, flattening instead of scattering. When a fishing skiff passed near the boundary of the area, the man aboard later reported that his oars felt heavy, as if drawing through colder water. That evening, just before dusk, the disturbance occurred again. This time, it was witnessed by 4 men. The water did not rise as high as before, but it moved more distinctly, lifting and settling twice in slow succession. One watcher noted that the motion appeared controlled, stopping abruptly rather than dissipating like a wave. Still, there was no noise. No birds reacted. No fish surfaced. No bubbles broke the surface. The men rang no alarms. Instead, they did what trained observers did best. They wrote. The logs from that night are notable for what they avoid. No speculation, no emotional language, only careful measurements of distance, time, and weather, recorded with the precision expected of men whose credibility depended on accuracy. Yet one line appears in a private journal, separate from the official record. Movement beneath the water, not consistent with tide or swell. Unsure of cause. By lantern light, the sea appeared calm. But several watchers later admitted they did not turn their backs on it icily. That night, they checked the water repeatedly, expecting, though they did not know what, for the surface to change again. Nothing happened, and that absence was troubling. Because if the disturbance had been mechanical, or geological, or the result of weather, it should have repeated predictably. Instead, it seemed to pause awaiting. By morning, fishermen along the coast had begun to talk among themselves. Nets had torn inexplicably. A buoy anchor had shifted inland overnight against the tide. One man claimed the water had drawn down around his boat for a moment, lowering it without warning. These reports reached the coast watchers gradually, filtered through routine exchanges. Each account, on its own, was unremarkable. Together, they suggested a pattern that none of them were prepared to define. The men continued to seek rational explanations. They consulted old charts. They reviewed past logs for similar entries. They watched to see more closely than before. What unsettled them most was not what they saw, but what they could not confirm. There was no shape, no surface breach, no visible source. Only the growing certainty that the water itself was being displaced from below, and that whatever caused it was not finished. The sea, they noted, had gone quiet again, too quiet, and they waited for the next disturbance. The breaking point came not with thunder or storm, but with a morning so calm it seemed ordinary. It was September 5, 1877. The air was still. The tide lay low. The horizon glimmered in pale sunlight, unmarred by fog or haze. The coast watchers, like all mornings, climbed their platforms and took up their instruments. Nothing about the day promised change. Yet by mid-morning, the disturbance returned, and this time, it was unmistakable. One watcher, stationed at the highest lookout, recorded seeing the water lift in a mass at least several yards across, moving as if pushed from beneath. The rise was gradual at first, then more pronounced, the surface forming a rounded, shadowed swell that lingered for nearly a minute. There was no wave, no froth, no splash. A second watcher, positioned farther along the coast, described the phenomenon in his journal as a ridge of water, firm as if hollowed from below, moving against the current. For the first time, multiple observers noted something breaking the surface of the water, though it was not clear what. Nothing identifiable emerged. No shape, no appendage, no mast or log. Only a dark, glistening silhouette, partially submerged, shifting with the swell. The men froze, not out of fear, but out of disbelief. Attempts at explanation failed immediately. They considered tides, currents, and submerged shoals. They checked the charts, recalculated the depths, and compared the readings of the night before. Everything was accounted for. Everything was accounted for itself. It did not behave according to any known law. The most unsettling detail, recorded by all, was the movement's deliberateness. It did not drift like a log. It did not pulse like the swell. It lifted, settled, shifted, and paused with a rhythm that seemed intentional, almost mindful. For nearly an hour, the watchers observed in silence. Some took notes. Some simply stared. One man later admitted in a private letter that he felt the water watching back. By noon, the phenomenon repeated, slightly closer to shore this time, though still beyond safe fishing range. The water rose and fell again, slow and controlled, leaving no trace behind. The men's instruments, thermometers, barometers, tide gauges, registered nothing unusual. Still, they knew something had changed. The breaking point was not a single event, but a shift in perception. The sea, once predictable and impersonal, now seemed to possess intention. Observers began to feel as though they were no longer merely watching, but being watched in return. The most experienced among them, men who had spent decades on these shores, admitted uneasily that the water felt wrong, in a way they could not quantify. It was as if the rhythm of the sea itself had been altered. That night, the lighthouse keeper lit the lamp, sweeping the beam across the dark water, but the disturbed area refused to reveal itself. In place of the expected calm, the surface held a subtle darkness, absorbing light differently, almost as if the water were denser there. Sleep was fitful. Several men later confessed to walking the shore in the darkness, compulsively checking the water. One recorded hearing the distant lapping of waves that were not there, a sound that vanished when he strained to locate it. By the following morning, the coast watchers were unsettled beyond their usual reserve. No one spoke openly of fear, but it was their latent, creeping, the kind of fear that does not shout, but insists on attention. And in the journals, for the first time, one man wrote, "I do not know if I am seeing, or if the sea wishes me to see. Whatever it is not water alone." The breaking point had arrived, not with violence, but with clarity. The sea had become something that could not be explained, yet could not be ignored. And for the first time, the men understood that their duty as observers might not be enough. They had crossed from seeing into witnessing, and there would be no simple return to the ordinary. In the days following September 5, 1877, the coast watchers carried on with their duties, but nothing was ordinary anymore. The routines of observation, the logging of tides, the trimming of lamps, the checking of weather remained, yet every action felt heavier, measured against an unseen tension. The disturbances continued, though sporadically. Some mornings the water appeared calm. Others, the surface lifted or darkened without warning. Each recurrence, however brief, carried the same subtle deliberateness that had unsettled the men. The phenomenon was never violent, but it was insistent, recurring in patterns that refused prediction. The psychological impact was evident. In private letters and journals, men described difficulty sleeping, unease along familiar paths, and a persistent need to watch the sea. One observer wrote of a quiet dread that sits heavier than the fog, while another confessed to waking at night, compelled to climb the platform stairs, even when he knew nothing would be visible. Fishermen along the coast noted their own apprehension. Nets were taken in earlier than usual. Boats avoided the stretch of water closest to the disturbances. Rumors began to circulate quietly among crews, though none reached newspapers. And no official reports recorded Fearonly observation. Efforts to document the phenomenon formally were cautious. The lighthouse keeper instructed men to measure distances, log times, and note weather conditions. Sketches were made, diagrams drawn, but these records were limited to the mechanics of what was seen. There was no speculation, no conclusion. Even private notes avoided conjecture, though a tone of unease crept in. Cannot explain the rise of water. Instruments show nothing unusual. Yet I am certain it is not merely the tide, one observer wrote. By mid-September, some of the men began taking informal precautions. They avoided turning their backs to the water, made sure 2 or 3 men always observed simultaneously, and marked points along the horizon where the disturbance most often appeared. No one spoke of fear publicly, yet the journals revealed that they were all aware of a new, unspoken rule. The sea, once predictable, was now something to be treated cautiously. Attempts to communicate with the outside world were minimal. A single letter, sent to a regional maritime office, described anomalies in tide and surface patterns, but it was largely dismissed as the result of unusual currents. No investigation followed. In subsequent weeks, the coast watchers realized that, without external verification, the burden of observation fell solely on them. What remained most troubling was not the disturbances themselves, but their inexplicability. There was no shape, no creature, no identifiable cause. The water behaved as if guided from below, yet left no trace. Instruments and charts could not account for it. Every measurement confirmed only that the event should not have been possible. One man summarized the collective unease in a journal entry dated September 12th. We continue our watches as if nothing has changed. Yet all that is familiar seems altered. The sea is no longer ours to read. We see it, we measure it, yet it refuses to yield its meaning. By the end of that week, a quiet resignation settled over the men. Observation continued, but with a cautious respect bordering on apprehension. The events of early September had shifted their perception. The coastline, the tides, the horizon itself were no longer simply elements of duty. They were potential harbingers of something unknown, and while the disturbances persisted, no one could say what they were witnessing, or whether it would stop or escalate further. In the isolation of the lighthouse platforms, the cottages along the cliffs, and the silent stretch of water, the coast watchers faced the uncomfortable truth. The sea, in a place they had long thought familiar, had become something they could observe but not understand. The quiet waiting began, and with it, the questions, small and persistent, outnumbered the answers. The months following September 1877 passed with no significant change in the outward pattern of daily life along the coast. The sea continued its rhythms. The lighthouse lamps were trimmed. Fishing boats set out and returned. And yet, the events of that early September remained, in the minds of those who had witnessed them, unsettling and unresolved. Official records are sparse. The logs of the coast watchers, preserved in small-bound journals, contain meticulous weather readings, tide measurements, and careful observations of the water. They do not offer conclusions. They do not name what was seen. One entry reads simply, "Surface lifted again today. No identifiable cause. Conditions normal otherwise." Other entries are more personal, sometimes written in margins or private notebooks. "I cannot write more in the official log. To do so would be speculation. Yet I know what I saw. It was not ordinary." These private writings suggest a shared recognition. Something unusual had occurred, yet there was hesitation, an unspoken rule against declaring it as more than a curiosity, a disturbance, a phenomenon observed but not understood. Years later, correspondence between former watchers hints at lingering uncertainty. One man, long retired, wrote that the water never returned entirely to how it had been, though he could not articulate what had changed. Another noted that the stretch of sea in question still feels different, though again, nothing could be measured to confirm it. Newspapers and maritime authorities of the era record only minor oddities: missing nets, shifted buoys, occasional unusual reflections on the water, never the full scope described in the watchers' journals. With no corroborating reports, the events faded from public record. surviving mainly in the careful notes of those present. Oral accounts persisted locally, but inconsistently. Some fishermen claimed tales of the moving water long after, describing it in vague terms. Strange rises, darker patches, moments when the sea did not behave like water. Others dismissed the memory entirely, attributing it to misperception or fear of unknown currents. No single account captured the entirety of what had been observed. The key question remained unanswered. What had caused the disturbances? Scientific explanations of the time currents, tidal anomalies, submerged topography, or large marine animals were considered, but none aligned fully with the recorded behavior. The observations were precise. The water rose and shifted, sometimes repeatedly, with an almost deliberate rhythm. No instrument, no measurement, no human eye could confirm the presence of anything at or above the surface. By the turn of the decade, the watchers themselves dispersed. Some remained along the coast, others moved inland. Their records were archived, largely unnoticed, except by those who later sought historical maritime observations. Scholars who reviewed the journals noted their meticulousness, the consistency across multiple witnesses, and the absence of exaggeration or fantasy. Yet conclusions were deliberately avoided. The phenomenon remained classified in their notes as unexplained. And so, the coast watchers left behind only what they could observe: the records, the private journals, and the silence between the lines. No one could say whether what they had witnessed was a natural anomaly, a misperception magnified by isolation, or something else entirely. All that remained was a stretch of sea calm, ordinary to the casual eye, yet marked in memory by those who had seen it rise in ways no law of tides or currents could explain. The story closes not with resolution, but with quiet persistence. The water lies still. The horizon remains. And in the journals, the last words echo the same uncertainty that settled over the watchers' minds in 1877. We observed, we recorded, and yet we do not know. Perhaps we never shall. The sea keeps its secret, and the coast watches, still and silent, continue, as if waiting for the next observer to notice something that cannot be named. The change, when it came, was gradual enough that no single moment could be identified as the turning point. In the days following August 28th, the disturbances continued, but irregularly. Sometimes the sea remained calm for hours. At other times, the same offshore area showed subtle signs of movement, a tightening of the surface, a slow lift, a darkening that spread and then withdrew. The men began to anticipate it, not openly, not aloud, but their attention returned, again and again, to the same stretch of water. On August 31st, shortly after noon, a watcher stationed at the northern platform observed something new. Through his spyglass, he noted a long disturbance beneath the surface, extending horizontally rather than rising vertically. The water above it did not break. Instead, it appeared to slide upward, as if resting on something passing beneath. He tracked it for several seconds. It moved steadily, not fast, not erratic, covering a distance that suggested scale rather than speed. When it reached the edge of the shoal, it stopped. The water above it lifted slightly, then settled. Nothing surfaced. When the watcher later attempted to describe what he had seen, he avoided metaphor entirely. He did not write of length or shape, only that the motion had direction and intent. That evening, the lighthouse keeper adjusted the lamp earlier than usual. As darkness fell, the beam swept the water in slow intervals. Each pass revealed the same unsettling detail. The disturbed area absorbed light differently, as though depth there was altered or obscured. No fog was present, no rain, no explanation offered itself. By now, the fishermen had changed their habits. Several refused to cast nets near the affected waters. One older man, whose name appears only in a local parish record, warned younger crews that the ground had gone wrong. When pressed, he said no more. The coast watchers, for their part, remained disciplined. No warnings were issued, no messages sent inland. Their role was observation, not interpretation. Still, the logs began to reflect unease. Entries became more frequent, measurements repeated, distances recalculated, the same facts recorded by different men, as if each felt the need to confirm the other's vision. On September 2nd, the disturbance occurred twice in one night. The first was minor, a brief rise, barely visible, noticed only because the watchers were already focused on the area. The second came just before midnight. This time, the water lifted higher than before, not dramatically, but unmistakably. The surface rose in a rounded mass, smooth and unbroken, holding for several seconds before slowly sinking back. One man later recalled that during those moments, the sea made no sound at all, not even the gentle movement of water against itself. No one spoke. When it was over, they looked to one another, as though expecting someone else to define what they had just seen. No one did. The rational explanations began to thin. There were no recorded earthquakes, no passing ships, no known tidal anomalies matching the behavior. Large marine animals were discussed quietly, but dismissed just as quickly. No fin, back, or breath had ever been observed. No churn of water, no trace left behind. What troubled them most was consistency. The disturbances returned to the same location. They behaved in similar ways. They stopped and started without apparent cause. And always, they seemed to originate from below. Sleep became difficult. Several watchers noted waking during the night and stepping outside, compelled to check the water even when nothing had been reported. One man admitted, in a private letter written weeks later, that he felt uneasy turning inland, as though something might occur if he was not watching. The sea itself offered no further clarity. Between disturbances, it lay calm, familiar, almost reassuring, but that familiarity had begun to feel false. By the first days of September, the coast watchers understood one thing with certainty. Whatever was happening was no longer isolated. It was repeating, and it was becoming harder to ignore. They did not yet know how close they were to the moment when observation would no longer feel sufficient. But they sensed it. In the quiet pauses between the sea's movements, something was approaching a limit and waiting for it to be crossed.